The Secret of the Indian by Reid Chapter 2 Modest Heroes. As the two uniformed policemen were shown into the living room and Omri's mother hurried down to them, Omri and Patrick had a welcome moment to themselves at the top of the stairs. "You look like a Sikh in that bandage," said Patrick. "Well, half a Sikh. Never mind what I look like. What are we going to do?" Patrick said nothing for a moment, then he said, "Make something up, I suppose. What else can we do?" "All right, but what?" "What that anyone would believe for 2 seconds. We might try saying that the skinheads did the damage to the wall. We could say they had, I don't know, spiked tools, gimlets, or chisels, or whatever, and just stuck them into everything for a laugh. Or we could say we don't know how they did it. We burst in, they ran. That's it. Leave the cops to figure it out. If they really look, they'll find minute bullets in the bottoms of the holes." "They won't. Why should they think to?" "Boys, come down here, will you?" It was Omri's dad calling. Peremptorily, they started to walk as slowly as they dared down the stairs. "And you'll burn," whispered Patrick. "Maybe we might say we did a bonfire in the garden and you cracked me over the head with a lighted branch." "Oh, great. Try saying that and I really will crack you." And that was it. So that was it. They didn't try to explain the little holes, and the police, assuming that the skinheads had been vandals as well as burglars, didn't examine them too closely. They went over everything else for fingerprints, but said that although there were quite a few, the chances were against them catching the thieves, who, technically speaking, weren't thieves at all because they hadn't actually gotten away with anything. Omri told the bonfire story without bringing Patrick into it. He just said, the inspiration of the moment, that they'd used a whole can of lighter fluid to get the fire going, and that he, Omri, had struck the match while his face was over the wood. His parents, who had been positively bursting with pride at the way the boys had rid the house of the invaders, abruptly changed their views about Omri's brilliance. "How could you have been so unutterably daft as to light a fire like that, you little half-wit?" his father expostulated. "How many times have I told you to—" A cough from one of the policemen interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir, were the two lads alone in the house? Because, as you no doubt know, it is severely frowned on to leave any young person under the age of 14 alone in a house at night." "Of course I know that, Sergeant, and we never do it. We always have a babysitter, very punctual and reliable. She was due at 7 tonight, and when we went out we assumed she was a couple of minutes late. She's never let us down before." "And where is that person, sir?" "She never showed up, Sergeant," said Omri's father shamefacedly. "Yes, I know what you're going to say, and you're perfectly right. We are to blame, and I shall never forgive myself." "I dare say you will, sir," said the sergeant levelly, "in time, but it would have been much harder to forgive yourself if worse had befallen." Both Omri's parents hung their heads miserably, and Omri moved closer to his mother, who looked as if she might burst into tears. "This is not exactly what you might call a salubrious neighborhood, especially after dark," went on the policeman. "Only this evening a lady was mugged at the end of your street. Pulled right off a bicycle, she was." "Her bicycle?" This from Omri's mother, whose head had come up sharply. "Yes, madam." Who was she? This lady who was mugged?" The sergeant glanced at his companion. "Do you remember the name, George?" George shrugged. "Some Polish-sounding name." Omri's mother and father exchanged horrified looks. "Not... Was it Mrs. Brankovsky?" "Something like that." "But that's her, our babysitter!" cried Omri's mother. "Oh, heavens, poor Basha!" "Basha?" inquired the younger policeman. "Is that her name, or what happened to her?" And he suppressed a snigger, but the sergeant gave him a stern look, and he subsided. "There's nothing humorous about it, George." No, Sergeant, sorry." "You'll be glad to hear she's not badly hurt, madam, but she had to go to the hospital, just for a check-up like. The muggers got her bag, though." "Oh, that's terrible. What kind of district have we come to live in?" "Ah," thought Omri, "now maybe you'll realize what I've been going through, walking along a hobble road to the station every day." They'd never accepted before that it was as horrible an area, and that he'd been scared. The policeman took all the details and descriptions of the skinheads. Could you identify them if you saw them again? Asked the sergeant. No, said Patrick. Omri said nothing. He knew he would see them again, like on Monday morning on the way to school. Whether he would turn them in or not, he had yet to decide. Adele and Guion came home from their film just as the police were leaving. "And who are these young gentlemen?" asked the sergeant. "They're Omri's older brothers." "What's going on?" asked Adele. "We've had burglars," said Omri quickly. "What?" yelled Guion. "They didn't get my stereo, did they?" "They didn't get a thing," said their father proudly. "Omri and Patrick chased them off." The older boys gaped at each other. "Them in what army?" asked Guion. Patrick stifled a sudden nervous giggle. "Only a little one." "Only a little one," he murmured. Omri then felled them with a heavy nudge. There was a lot more talking to do. Adele and Guion had to hear the whole story, except that, of course, it was nothing like the whole story, all over again. They were absolutely agog, and even Guion could find nothing sarcastic to say about the way Omri and Patrick had dealt with the situation. "You're a pair of nutters," was the worst he could think of. "Those thugs could have flattened you. How did you know they didn't have knives?" But there was more than a hint of admiration in his reproof. Adele, the oldest, said, "Right pair of heroes, if you ask me. We could have been cleaned out." And he gazed lovingly, not at his little brother, but at the television set. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning by the time they'd drained the last of their hot chocolate and had been gently shooed off to bed by Omri's mother. She gave Omri a special hug, being careful of his head, and hugged Patrick too. "You're fantastic kids," she said. Omri and Patrick looked uncomfortable. It simply didn't seem right to either of them that they were getting all the credit for driving off the invaders single or double-handed, when in fact they'd had a great deal of help. As soon as they got to Omri's bedroom in the attic, they locked the door and made for the desk. They'd had to make a hasty decision before the return of the parents. To leave things as they were, not to send anybody else back after they dispatched Corporal Willie Fickets and his men. As Patrick pointed out, "We don't know how the wounded would stand the journey. Besides, we can't send the Indian back to their time without Matron, and we can't send her back to hers without them, and we certainly can't send them all anywhere together." And Omri had agreed. But they'd both been on tenterhooks all the time. The police had been in the house for fear they'd demand to see Omri's room. The boys had been very careful to say the burglars hadn't gotten beyond the second floor of the house. Now the boys bent over the desk. They'd left Omri's bedside light on in case Matron had to tend to one of the wounded Indians in the night. She herself now sat upright, but clearly dozing, at a small circular table made of a screw top of a Timote shampoo bottle, a good shape because it had a rim she could get her knees under. On it lay a tiny clipboard, which she had brought with her from St. Thomas's Hospital. She'd been making up her notes and temperature charts. On either side of her on the floor of the longhouse stretched a double row of pallet beds. Each bed was occupied by a wounded Indian. Matron's ministrations had been so efficient that all were resting peacefully. She had earned her a little nap, though she would probably deny hotly later that she had nodded off while on duty. Outside the longhouse, beside the burnt-out candle, a blanket was spread on the soil in Omri's father's seed tray. Curled up asleep on the blanket were little Baron Brightstar's, his wife. Between them, in the crook of Brightstar's arm, lay their newborn baby, Tall Bear. All these people, when they were standing up, were no more than 3 inches high. And that's the end of Chapter 2.